The Po-2 biplane shudders as Senior Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova pulls back the throttle. No cockpit heating, no parachutes, no radio. The August night over the Taman Peninsula is moonless, perfect for killing. Beside her, in the open rear cockpit, navigator Katya Ryabova leans over the side, eyes straining into blackness, clutching a stopwatch and a hand-drawn map. The wind tears at her leather helmet. At 900 meters, she taps Popova's shoulder twice. The signal. Popova cuts the engine. The sudden silence is total. Only wind whistling through wing struts. The Po-2, a fabric-covered crop duster never designed for war, becomes a glider, a ghost descending toward the German positions below. Through the darkness, Ryabova spots them. Cooking fires, vehicle headlights carelessly uncovered, the faint geometric shadows of ammunition dumps. She counts seconds on her stopwatch. 15, 12, 9. The blackness erupts. Searchlights claw upward, dozens of them, turning night into a cage of intersecting beams. Flat guns open up. 20 millimeters, 37 millimeters, 88 millimeters, filling the air with tracer fire that looks from above like deadly fireworks. Popova banks hard left. The Po-2's wooden frame groans. Ryabova nearly loses her grip. They're too low now, committed. 7 seconds. 5. Ryabova releases the bombs. 4 50-kilogram high explosives drop by hand over the side. Popova restarts the engine. It coughs, catches. The tiny biplane claws for altitude as the bombs detonate below, orange flowers blooming in the darkness, secondary explosions as something combustible catches. Behind them, the sky fills with tracers searching for a target that's already gone. By the time they land at 4:15 a.m., Popova and Ryabova will have flown 8 more sorties. 18 sorties in one night, the record for the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. The Germans called them Nachthexen, the Night Witches. In October 1941, as German armies encircled Moscow and Wehrmacht commanders planned victory parades through Red Square, a 29-year-old Soviet aviator named Marina Raskova received permission to do something no military in the world had attempted: form 3 combat air regiments composed entirely of women. Not women in support roles, not nurses or clerks. Women as combat pilots, navigators, mechanics, and armorers. It was, by any standard of the era, revolutionary. The Soviet Union in 1941 was not a bastion of gender equality. Soviet women still faced systemic discrimination in education, advancement, and daily life. But desperation creates opportunity. The Wehrmacht had destroyed thousands of Soviet aircraft in the war's opening weeks. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. Stalin's regime, pragmatic in its brutality, needed anyone who could fly. Marina Raskova was already a legend, holder of multiple world records, recipient of the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal, one of the most famous aviators in the USSR. When she proposed all-female air units, Stalin personally approved. The call went out in October 1941. Women with aviation experience report for military service. They came in thousands. Senior Sergeant Marina Raskova, Reconstructed Memoir, 1985. We came from flying clubs, from universities, from collective farms. Some girls were 17, lying about their age to join. We had mechanics who'd never seen a military aircraft, navigators who'd only flown in perfect weather, pilots with maybe 40 hours of flight time. The recruiters looked at us like we were insane. In a way, we were. We wanted to fight. The selection process was brutal. Of over 2,000 applicants, only 400 were chosen. They were sent to Engels, a training base on the Volga, where they would be transformed from civilian pilots into combat aviators. But which aircraft would they fly? The answer for the 58th Regiment was underwhelming: the Polikarpov Po-2. The Po-2 was designed in 1928 as a primary trainer and crop duster. Fabric-covered wood frame, open cockpits, maximum speed 150 kilometers per hour,
slower than many World War II fighters could even fly without stalling. It carried no defensive armament initially, no radio, no enclosed cockpit. Maximum bomb load, 350 kilograms, carried in metal racks under the lower wings and in the rear cockpit. By any technical measure, the Po-2 was obsolete before the war even began. It was also, in the right hands, a devastating weapon. Lieutenant Colonel Werner Hoffmann, 3rd Panzer Division. Interrogation record, July 1944. We called them Näh machines, sewing machines, because of the sound the engines made. At first we laughed. A wood and fabric biplane against the Wehrmacht? But you couldn't shoot them down easily. Our fighters were too fast. They'd overshoot. Our flak predictors were calibrated for fast targets. These things flew too low, too slow. And they came every night. Every single night. You could not sleep. You could not rest. Men became unraveled. The Po-2, a fabric-covered crop duster never designed for war, became a glider, a ghost descending toward the German positions below. The women of the 58th stand in formation at 5:30 a.m., snow falling, temperature minus 35 degrees Celsius. They wear men's uniforms, boot size 42 for women with size 37 feet, padded with newspaper, belts wrapped twice around waists, helmets that slide down over eyes. Political Commissar Yevdokia Bershanskaya watches them shiver. She shows no sympathy. Major Bershanskaya, reconstructed training address. You wanted to fight like men. You will be treated like men. Worse, because the entire Soviet Air Force is watching you fail. You will fly in conditions that would ground any other regiment. You will fly missions when you are sick, exhausted, terrified. You will watch friends die and fly the next night. This is not heroism. This is necessity. The motherland is dying. If you cannot do this, leave now.
The training was accelerated, 3 months instead of the usual 2 years. They flew in all weather, day and night. They learned to navigate without instruments, using rivers, forests, villages, landmarks memorized from maps. They practiced engine-off approaches until they could glide a Po-2 onto a target within 50 meters. They learned to load bombs in the dark, to repair engines with freezing hands, to fly by instinct when visibility dropped to 0. And they learned the tactics that would define the Night Witch's combat doctrine. The approach: multiple aircraft attacking in succession, 1 minute apart. While German searchlights and flak focused on one plane, others approached from different vectors. The feint: the lead aircraft would deliberately attract attention, flying slightly higher, making more noise. While the Germans concentrated fire, the second aircraft would glide in undetected and strike the actual target. The hunt: continuous harassment, 8, 10, 15 sorties per night per crew. German soldiers never knew when the next attack would come. Sleep deprivation became a weapon. Navigator Marina Raskova, diary entry, May 1942. We are being shaped into something new. Not men, not women. Something else. Creatures of darkness. I do not recognize myself in the mirror anymore. My hands shake even when I'm not flying, but when I'm in the cockpit, everything becomes clear. I know exactly what I am for. In May 1942, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment deployed to the Southern Front. The war would test everything they'd learned. The German summer offensive, Operation Blue, has shattered Soviet defenses. Panzer divisions race toward the Caucasus oil fields. Army Group A advances 80 kilometers per day. Soviet forces retreat in chaos. The 588th arrives at a forward airstrip near Armavir to find it under artillery fire. They land, refuel, and launch their first combat missions within 2 hours. Senior Lieutenant Yevdokia Nosal and navigator Irina Kashirina take off at 10:47 p.m., targeting a German forward supply depot identified by reconnaissance. They've trained for months. They've flown hundreds of hours. Nothing prepared them for this. Senior Lieutenant Nosal, After Action Report, July 1942. At 800 meters, we were illuminated by 14 searchlights simultaneously. I have never experienced such light. It was like flying inside the sun. I could not see my instruments, could not see the ground, could not see anything except white. The flak was immediate. I felt impacts on the lower wing, heard fabric tearing. Kashirina was screaming coordinates, but I could not hear her over the anti-aircraft fire. I dove, pulled up, turned. Instinct only. Somehow we got clear. We never dropped our bombs. We were supposed to return to base. I was too ashamed. We found another target and attacked from a different angle. This time, we succeeded. 4 aircraft from the 588th were damaged that first night. One was shot down. The crew survived with injuries. But they had also destroyed 2 ammunition dumps, damaged 6 vehicles, and kept German troops awake from 10 p.m. until 4 a.m. The operations log recorded, "Regiment performed as trained. Will continue operations tonight." They would continue operations for the next 3 years. By September 1942, German commanders on the Southern Front began receiving reports that their troops found increasingly difficult to explain. Units were requesting relief not due to combat casualties, but to psychological exhaustion. Soldiers were falling asleep on watch. Officers reported that men were refusing to leave dugouts after dark. Entire companies showed signs of collective stress disorder. The cause was always the same: the night witches. Obergefreiter Hans Schmid, 4th Mountain Division, letter home, September 1942. You cannot understand what it is like, Mother, until you have lived it. Every night they come, sometimes 1, sometimes 20. You hear them before you see them, a soft rustling like wind through trees, but there is no wind. Then the searchlights catch them, these tiny biplanes, moving so slowly they seem to float. We fire everything we have. Sometimes we hit them, and they simply absorb the damage and keep coming. Sometimes we miss entirely. They turn so sharply, our tracers just fly past. Then the bombs fall. Not large bombs, but enough. Enough to destroy a truck, kill men in a dugout, set fuel drums ablaze. Then they are gone, and 15 minutes later, another comes, and another. All night. Every night. Some men have stopped sleeping entirely. They just sit with their rifles, staring at the sky, waiting. I am becoming one of them. The psychological impact was amplified by the Po-2's unique acoustic signature. The engine-off glide approach meant the first sound German soldiers heard was not engine noise, but the whistle of wind through wing struts, a sound multiple German accounts describe as supernatural, ghostly, or like a witch's broom. The nickname Nachthexen first appears in German military communications in October 1942. It was not coined by propaganda. It emerged organically from frontline troops trying to describe something that felt, in the darkness, like a visitation from folklore. Lieutenant Friedrich Weber, 3rd Flak Division, Combat Diary, November 1942. They are called witches because this is what they are. No human women would do this, fly in such aircraft in such conditions night after night. I have heard them described as Stalin's revenge, as punishment sent from hell. My men will not use their names. They say speaking of them invites attack. We have placed crucifixes near the flak positions. I do not report this to command. What would I say? That grown men, battle-hardened soldiers, are terrified of women in wooden biplanes? But it is true. We are. The Soviets, recognizing the psychological leverage, began emphasizing the regiment's composition in leaflets and propaganda broadcasts. The messages said, "Women are hunting you.
Soviet mothers are avenging their children. It worked. The night witches became a psychological weapon unto themselves.
April 1943. Not all missions ended with returning to base. Junior Lieutenant Yevgenia Rudneva and pilot Panna Prokopieva are hit by flak at 400 meters during a bombing run on German artillery positions. Shrapnel tears through the rear cockpit. Rudneva, navigator, is killed instantly. Prokopieva, severely wounded, manages to keep the PO-2 in the air long enough to crash land behind Soviet lines. She is found at dawn, unconscious, Rudneva's body still strapped in behind her. The 58th loses 30 aircraft and 26 crew members over the course of the war, a casualty rate of roughly 30%. This is lower than many Soviet aviation units, but every loss carried additional weight. The women flew without parachutes. There was no room, no weight capacity. If your aircraft was hit and burning, you rode it down. Senior Sergeant Galina Brock-Beltsova, Reconstructed Memoir, 1987. After we lost someone, we did not speak of it immediately. We could not afford to. You had to fly again that same night, so you packed away her belongings, you cleaned out her cockpit, and you went back into the sky. The grief came later, in quiet moments, waking up and remembering she would never wake up, reaching to tell her something and realizing she was gone. We lived with ghosts. They flew beside us every night. Some losses were particularly devastating. In January 1943, Marina Raskova, founder of the Women's Aviation Regiments, the woman who made it all possible, was killed when her P-2 dive bomber crashed in bad weather. She was 30 years old. Her state funeral in Moscow was attended by thousands. Stalin himself was a pallbearer. For the women of the 588th, Raskova's death was both personal tragedy and a reminder. This war took everyone, eventually. But they kept flying. By mid-1943, the Wehrmacht had adapted. Flak batteries were reconfigured to engage low, slow targets. Fighters were forbidden from pursuing PO-2s at low altitude after multiple Messerschmitts crashed attempting to do so. German forces installed additional searchlights and increased night patrols. The night witches adapted in turn. They began using trios, 3 aircraft attacking in coordinated sequence. 2 would attract attention from opposite directions, while the third struck from a blind angle. They varied approach altitudes, timing, and flight paths to prevent German gunners from predicting their tactics. Some crews became specialists. Nadezhda Popova and Katya Ryabova perfected the art of the engine-cut glide, approaching to within 200 meters before releasing bombs, point-blank range by aviation standards. Yevdokia Bershanskaya, the regiment commander, flew combat missions alongside her pilots, leading by example. The PO-2 itself was modified. Some aircraft received makeshift bomb sights, simple metal frames that allowed more accurate drops. Others were fitted with machine guns in the rear cockpit, not effective weapons, but enough to suppress ground fire during the final approach. Weight was obsessively managed. Every kilogram mattered when your maximum payload was 350 kilograms. Senior Mechanic Inna Pasportnikova, Reconstructed Interview, 1983. We rebuilt those planes with our hands, often in complete darkness, in freezing cold, under artillery fire. We had no spare parts, so we cannibalized damaged aircraft. We used fabric from parachutes to patch wings. We hand-filed metal parts when tools broke. The male mechanics at other regiments would walk past our aircraft and laugh. "Look, the women are playing with toys." Then they would see our sortie counts, 18 sorties per night, every night. The laughing stopped. Our planes flew more missions than any other regiment in the Air Force. That was not because of the aircraft. That was because of us. By the war's end, the 588th had flown over 23,000 combat sorties and dropped over 3,000 tons of bombs. Some pilots flew over 800 individual missions, numbers that dwarf typical bombing campaign totals for Western Allied air crews. 23 members of the regiment received the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal, the highest military decoration in the USSR. Dozens more received Orders of the Red Banner, Orders of the Patriotic War, and other citations, but recognition came slowly and often grudgingly. The women of the 588th fought two wars, one against the Wehrmacht, one against their own military establishment. Male pilots and ground crew frequently refused to take them seriously. Requests for supplies were ignored. Maintenance support was delayed or denied. Senior Soviet officers referred to them as toys and Raskova's folly. Guards Captain Raisa Aronova, diary entry, August 1943. Today, a general visited our airfield. He watched us prepare for the night's missions, loading bombs, checking engines, reviewing targets. Then he said, "When do the real pilots arrive?" Our commander said, "Comrade General, we are the real pilots." He laughed. That night we flew 12 sorties against his sector's targets. The next morning he apologized. Privately, of course, never in front of his staff. The gender dynamics were complicated. Some male soldiers viewed the night witches with genuine respect, even awe. Others resented their presence, seeing them as a propaganda stunt. Still others reacted with patronizing protectiveness, treating combat aviators like children in need of sheltering. Romantic relationships developed, inevitable when young people face death together. Some were officially discouraged, others tacitly accepted. Marriages occurred, as did pregnancies, which usually meant removal from combat duty. The Soviet propaganda machine both elevated and exploited them. Posters showed beautiful women aviators, hair perfect, smiling, nothing like the exhausted, hollow-eyed crews who actually flew. Newsreels emphasized feminine qualities, reinforcing traditional gender roles, even while celebrating women doing traditionally male work. Senior Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova, interviewed 1995. They wanted us to be heroes, but also to remain women, which meant, in their minds, soft, gentle, maternal. We were none of those things in the cockpit. We were killers. We dropped bombs on living human beings and flew away before the screaming stopped. That does not make you gentle. The propaganda never showed that part. They never showed what we became. After the war, many night witches struggled to reintegrate into civilian life. They had PTSD before there was a term for it. They had skills, navigation, mechanics, leadership that Soviet civilian society had no use for. Many were told to marry, have children, forget the war. Some did. Others couldn't.
May 2, 1945. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment flies its final combat mission on May 2, 1945, a bombing raid against German positions near Berlin. By the time they land, the war in Europe is effectively over. They have flown from the Caucasus to Germany. They have survived 3 years of continuous combat operations. They have helped break the Wehrmacht, and now, suddenly, it's finished. Guards Major Yevdokia Bershinskaya. Final address to regiment, May 1945. Comrades, pilots, navigators, mechanics, sisters. What we have done together will never be repeated. We have flown more missions than any other night bomber regiment in the Soviet Air Force. We have struck the enemy when no one else could. We have proven that women can fight, can kill, can sacrifice, as well as any man. Some of us will be celebrated. Most of us will be forgotten. This is the nature of war. But you will know. I will know. We will always know what we did in the darkness. The regiment was disbanded in October 1945. The women returned to civilian life. Some continued flying, civil aviation, crop dusting, flight instruction. Others became engineers, teachers, doctors. A few committed suicide, unable to reconcile their wartime selves with peacetime expectations. For decades, the night witches were footnotes in Soviet military history, mentioned briefly, if at all. The Soviet state preferred to emphasize male heroism, male sacrifice. The women's regiments were an awkward fit for post-war narratives about masculinity and martial virtue. It was only in the 1980s and 1990s, as the Soviet Union collapsed and historical records opened, that the full story of the night witches emerged. Interviews with survivors revealed the scope of their accomplishments, the brutality of their combat experience, the complexity of their legacy. From a purely military perspective, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment's impact is difficult to quantify precisely. They destroyed supplies, disrupted logistics, killed enemy personnel. But their greatest weapon was psychological, the cumulative effect of relentless, inescapable harassment. German units subjected to sustained night witch attacks showed measurably decreased combat effectiveness. Sleep deprivation, constant stress, and the psychological weight of being hunted by women in wooden airplanes eroded morale and operational capacity. The Wehrmacht never developed an effective counter to low-altitude night harassment bombing. They tried faster fighters, too fast to engage PO-2s effectively. They tried more flak. The PO-2s flew too low, too slow, too unpredictably. They tried ignoring them. The cumulative damage was too severe. The night witches represented asymmetric warfare at its finest, using limited resources, inferior equipment, and tactical innovation to create disproportionate effects. But they also represented something more. Historian Dr. Anna Krylova reconstructed analysis. The night witches challenged fundamental assumptions about gender, capability, and war. They proved that courage, skill, and endurance are not masculine traits. They are human traits. They flew obsolete aircraft under impossible conditions and achieved extraordinary results. And they did it while fighting against not just the Wehrmacht, but against their own society's expectations of what women could and should be. That might be their greatest victory. The German soldiers who feared them, who called them witches, who couldn't sleep because of them, understood something visceral. Whoever these women were, they were effective. Gender became irrelevant when bombs fell from the darkness. A restored PO-2 hangs from the ceiling of the Central Museum of the Great Patriotic War in Moscow. The placard reads, PO-2 Night Bomber, 588th Night Bomber Regiment, 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment. Over 23,000 combat sorties flown. Awarded guard status, February 1943. Beneath it, photographs. Young women in leather helmets, smiling despite exhaustion. Nadezhda Popova, who flew 852 missions. Irina Sebrova, who flew over 1,000. Yevdokia Bershinskaya, who commanded them all. Faces that look impossibly young for what they endured. Most are now dead. The last of the night witches passed away in the 2010s, taking their first-hand memories with them. What remains are records, interviews, after-action reports, and the testimony of German soldiers who faced them. In 2013, Russian President Vladimir Putin honored the few surviving night witches at a Kremlin ceremony. Most were in wheelchairs, in their 90s, frail in ways their younger selves never were. But when one was asked what she remembered most about the war, she didn't hesitate. Senior Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova, interview, 2013, 6 months before her death. I remember the silence when you cut the engine. just wind and darkness and the knowledge that in 30 seconds you would either succeed or die. I remember my friends' faces before missions, how we looked at each other, knowing this might be the last time. And I remember the sky, always the sky. We owned the night. They called us witches, and maybe that's what we were. Women who refused to stay on the ground, who took to the air when the world said we couldn't, who fought when the world said women don't fight. We were witches, and we were glorious. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment, later designated the 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment, flew 23,672 combat sorties, dropped over 3,000 tons of bombs, and is credited with destroying or damaging 17 river crossings, 9 railways, 2 railway stations, 26 warehouses, 12 fuel depots, 176 armored cars, 86 firing positions, and causing significant casualties to German personnel. 23 members received the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal, making it the most decorated female unit in the Soviet Air Force. 30 night witches were killed in combat. Their average age was 22. None were issued parachutes.
And even now, decades later, their legacy cuts through the darkness like the whisper of those plywood wings. Young women, many barely out of school, flying without parachutes, in open cockpit biplanes, against one of the most powerful armies on Earth. They weren't supposed to matter. They weren't supposed to survive. But they became legends. If you want more stories of courage, grit, and forgotten heroes of World War II, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one.